All right, welcome back to Under the Hedge. We are finally back with a battle report. Going to change up the style a bit this week. This week I'll be doing the narration myself, and we're also playtesting a custom-made Commander Daven Lannister, Warden of the West. We're playing Here We Stand, and we will be facing off against Rick is a Machine and his Starks, led by Brendan Tully in the She-Bears. You got Roderick, Rob, and Arya. Jaime Lannister is going to be in the Poor Fellows. You got a Champion of the Faith in the Warrior's Sons. Gregor is in the Knights of Castle Rock and the Castle Rock Honor Guard, led by our customized miniature Daven Lannister. Tywin, High Sparrow, and Pycelle on the tactics board. Lannisters win priority for the terrain deployment, and it's a pretty straightforward approach. Lannisters want to hurt morale, so they drop a couple of corpse piles. Starks want to counter that, so they drop 2 heart trees. Following this, the Starks win priority for the Lannisters open with the Poor Fellows on the far left flank, and Shaggy Dog is put into outflank. After this, the Lannisters basically clog up the middle with their heavy infantry units. The Starks lean more to the far right flank with their infantry gradually getting their Tully Cav and Stormcrow mercenaries down more in the center left. The Knights of Castle Rock finish on the far left flank. After deployment, Daven Lannister will trigger his ability. This is a new one that we made up based on the Knightly Vow. This is an Oath of Vengeance. So after deployment is completed, Daven is going to be able to target an enemy attachment. Any unit that attachment is in for the remainder of the game, he will gain Vicious on his melee attacks, and if you control the crown, he also gains Critical Blow. And so he selects Brendan Tully in the She-Bears, and we enter round 1. Both players draw 3 cards, and the Lannisters decide that they will go first. They open with High Sparrow, taking the tactic zone, dropping a panic token on the spears, drawing a couple briberies, and the High Sparrow also attaches himself to those spearmen. Rob then takes the maneuver zone. The spearmen maneuver up the flank 5 inches, and Lannister pays his debts is played on the Warrior's Sons. Pycelle grabs the crown, and he attempts to zap the spearmen, who pass. The panic token gets spent, but they still pass. Arya chooses to pass her activation, and Tywin claims the wealth zone. He replaces it with bribery onto Brendan and the She-Bears. Roderick then claims the combat zone and puts a vulnerable token out on the honor guard with his ability. The Poor Fellows maneuver into the rear of the Warrior's Sons. Spearmen march up the flank and pivot towards center. The Warrior's Sons maneuver forward and pivot to face their foes. Brendan Tully and the She-Bears move within long range of the Warrior's Sons and try to remain just at a short range of the corpse pile. The Warrior's Sons do a war cry. They are successful. They put out a vulnerable token onto Brendan Tully and his She-Bears, and then they generate a faith token. The honor guard activates and maneuvers forwards towards Brendan Tully. Brendan Tully and the She-Bears then decide to do their war cry. They also pass. They remove the bribery and put a panic token out onto the Warrior's Sons. Stormcrow Mercs maneuver towards the flank. The Lannisters use their first pass token. The Tully Cav then have swift reposition played on them, after which they activate, maneuver 5 to the front of the She-Bears, and then march 10 inches across the front of the honor guard, putting themselves into their flank. In response, Gregor and the Knights activate and maneuver, then march a total of 15 inches trying to get over to cover that flank. That'll end round 1. Lannisters throw away their other bribery card in order to draw a subjugation of power. And the Starks throw away a set for charge to refill their hand. Round 2. The Starks will be going first this round, and they open with their war cry. It is successful, so they are able to put out a panic token. In response, the Lannisters, with their start of turn, trigger Tywin and turn off all of the Tully's abilities. They then put 4 hits onto the She-Bears, 2 of which get through. They put a vulnerable token onto a vulnerable and a panic token onto the Tully Cav. They then do a panic test on the Tully Cav, who fail. Token is spent to reroll the white dice. 2 wounds get through. Now, with their actual activation having been turned off, the Tully Cav charge is negated, and Robb claims the maneuver zone, influences the Tully Cav, and then maneuvers them back and away. Warcry is used by the Warrior's Sons. It is successful, and they put out a panic token on the She-Bears and generate a faith token. Pycelle then activates and claims the tactic zone. With the zone and his own ability, he's able to put out a weaken on both the Tully Cav and the She-Bears, and then draw 2 cards. The Tullys then claim the wealth zone in order to heal 2 wounds and remove a token from the panic token from the Tully Cav, putting them back to full health. Tywin activates and claims a quadrant of the board by the spearmen. The spearmen activate and maneuver 5 inches further into the Lannister held side of the board. The Warrior's Sons then maneuver towards the She-Bears and Stormcrow mercenaries. Roderick claims the swords in order to put a vulnerable onto the Warrior's Sons. And then the High Sparrow claims the crown, and his influence goes onto the She-Bears. He then does a panic check on the Stormcrow mercenaries, who pass it, and play refuse to yield, simply to burn the card. The She-Bears activate and maneuver more towards center. The Honor Guard then activates in response and marches forward, putting themselves in short range of Brynden and the She-Bears. The Tully Cav activate and maneuver, keeping themselves in the flank and behind the Heart Tree. The second Swift Reposition is then played to maneuver the Stormcrow Mercs 3 inches forwards. And we finally get to see one of Daven's new cards, Siege Tactics, is played, negating the Poor Fellow's activation in order to shoot into Brynden Tully and his She-Bears. Because they're in short range of Daven, they get the rerolls. However, they are not needed, and 4 wounds are suffered. We did forget to take a panic test here on that attack. It should have been a panic test with Vicious. That was missed. The Stormcrow mercenaries then activate and move into the front of the Warrior's Sons, making it so that both the Warrior Sons and the Honor Guard can't charge the She-Bears together. At this point, Clegane and his knights activate and maneuver 5 inches, and then march up, putting the corpse pile over their front so that any charge will have to hit it in their front. And that ends round 2. The Lannisters control 3 zones and score 3 points, and the Starks control 1 and score 1. Round 3. With the Lannisters back in control of first player, the Direwolf Shaggy Dog is outflanked into the far rear flank of the Lannisters. At the start of the turn, the North Remembers is played on the Spearmen, and the Warrior's Sons use their war cry again. They pass and are able to put out a vulnerable on the Stormcrow mercenaries. and generate yet another faith token. With the first action of the turn, Daven activates and declares a charge on Brynden and his she-bears. It is successful. With all the tokens on them, the Honor Guard are able to get all 4 of their abilities, so Vicious, Sundering, rerolls, and turning off all of the she-bear and Brynden's abilities for the turn. After a reroll, all 7 hit, and the she-bears are unable to block all but 1, meaning they are killed. The Lannisters will score a victory point. The Honor Guard retreats back onto the corpse pile and pivots so that it can see the Stormcrow mercenaries. Robb then claims the tactic zone and draws 2 cards, and also puts the final condition token on the Honor Guard, giving them the rainbow. His influence goes on the Stormcrow mercenaries. Arya then uses one of her orders at the start of the Lannister turn to maneuver the Stormcrow mercenaries out of sight of the warriors' sons and into their flank. Pycelle then claims the maneuver zone and puts a weaken token on the Tully Cav, and the poor fellows maneuver 5 inches forward and then spin around so that Shaggy Dog is no longer in their side. Roderick grabs the combat zone and with his ability again is able to put a vulnerable out onto the knights. Assault Orders is then played to replace the zone with a charge on their lowest attack dice. The charge is successful and they throw 4 dice with reckless strikes, giving them critical blow precision, and suffer wounds on 1s if they roll any. Winter's Coming is also played so that enemies successfully charged by this unit cannot be the target of friendly orders or tactics cards this turn. After a reroll, he hits 3 critical blows and precisions, doing 3 immediate wounds with 4 more hits to block. The warrior's sons only block 1. The vulnerable is spent. All 4 get through, but they spend a faith token to make it 3. They then pass their panic test, but the panic token is spent. However, they are up to the challenge and regain their faith token. The High Sparrow then claims the wealth zone. He heals them back 3. His influence then goes onto the Stormcrow mercenaries. Arya then claims the crown and zaps the knights on a -2. However, they pass in style. At the start of the Lannisters' turn, Arya uses her last order in order to do a retreat with the Stormcrow mercenaries. They are able to get into the flank of the poor fellows, and the warrior's sons gain a weakened token and cannot pivot thanks to the Crannogmen attachment. So the warrior sons activate and they maneuver back 5 inches and flip around to face the Stormcrow mercenaries, who then activate but have subjugation of power played on them. They fail their test, taking 2 wounds and losing all of their abilities. However, they decide it's still worth charging and they roll a 1. So no rerolls or any of their abilities. After the dice are thrown, only 2 hit, and the poor fellows block 1 of them. They then pass their panic test, taking only 1 wound on that. I agreed to let him use the token after the fact, as he had forgotten it, but remembered it before we had moved on to any other plays. So he re-rolled his misses and landed 3 more hits. 2 got through, so in the end it was a total of 3 wounds. The poor fellows then activate. They spend a faith token to heal 2 wounds back. Then they spend their other faith token to gain precision and rerolls and attack the Stormcrow mercenaries. However, they do not land any hits. After a reroll, they land 1. It does get through for 1 wound. However, the Stormcrow mercenaries are able to pass this test and heal 1 back from Dauntless. The House Tully Cavaliers, I should say, activate and have a little trouble staying upright there, but they decide to declare a charge on the Knights of Casterly Rock. It is successful. They are throwing 9 dice with no rerolls. However, they spend the second Roderick token in order to gain those rerolls, and after that is said and done, 8 hit. The weaken is spent, only lowering it by 1 more, and 7 hit. The knights are able to block only 2, taking 5 wounds. However, vulnerable is spent, and still only 5 wounds get through. They then pass their panic test, barely, and trigger Lannister Supremacy. Lannister Supremacy is then triggered, and the Telecav fail it for what should have been 6 wounds because of intimidating presence. However, I think we forgot that here, and they only took 5. The Knights of Castle Rock then activate and swing back into the Telecav. However, they only land 2 hits. 1 does get through, finishing off that rank. However, they then pass their panic test and are able to heal 2 back. After the panic test is successful, the second refuse to yield is played, and because it is a Tully Cav unit, it is D3 plus 1 wounds healed. However, the Lannisters play counterplot on that, and they pass that test, so the card is negated. The start of the turn, Warcry is played on the Tully Cav. They take another morale test. White dice shouldn't have been rolled, but anyways, it is passed, and they heal another 2 wounds and put a vulnerable onto the Knights with Gregor. The Spearmen then activate and maneuver up 5 inches towards the flank of Gregor and his Knights, at which point the Lannisters are out of activations, so Shaggy Dog activates. He maneuvers and then successfully charges into the front of the poor fellows. He throws 4 dice, and after rerolls, 3 hit. All 3 get through, and then they fail their panic test for an additional 1, taking a total of 4 wounds. The round ends, and the Lannisters again control 3 zones, scoring 3 points, and the Starks score 1. Going into round 4, the Starks are first player and open with Roger Cassell on the swords. Intrigue and Subterfuge is played, however, to negate the ability to put out a vulnerable token. The Stormcrow mercenaries then attack the poor fellows. They now have Reckless Strikes back and will throw 7 dice. All 7 hit with 3 precision critical blows, which immediately reduces them to 4 wounds. They save 2, but it is not enough, and Jaime and the poor fellows are killed. The Starks score a victory point, giving them 3. The Stormcrow mercenaries then pivot, and Shaggy Dog elects not to surge forth, but rather just to perform a pivot. The Warriors' Sons perform a war cry. They are successful and generate another faith token. They put a panic token onto the mercenaries and then charge them. They are successful. They spend another faith token to gain Sunder rerolls. They throw 7 dice, and with their rerolls, all 7 land. However, their weakened token is spent, and after that, they only land 4. Stormcrow mercenaries don't save any, however, take 4 wounds, then fail their panic test. The panic token is spent, and they take 1 additional wound. Fealty to the Crown is played on the failed panic test, and with the Knights managing to be in long range, they heal 2. Robb Stark then claims the maneuver zone, and he is able to move Shaggy Dog 6 inches into the rear side of the Warriors' Sons, and his influence also goes on to Shaggy Dog. Tywin then activates and claims the far back quadrant. In response, Arya claims the wealth zone. She heals 3 wounds and removes a condition token from the Telecav. With his final order, Pycelle claims the tactic zone and puts a weakened token onto the Spearmen. He then draws 2 cards, and then with the zone's ability puts a panic token onto the Telecav. Second Lannister plays his debts is then played on the Castle Rock Honor Guard. Shaggy Dog then activates, maneuvers, and declares a charge on the rear of Clegane and the Knights. It is successful, and he's now throwing 4 dice with a -4 on the panic test as well as a -3 to their armor. They're only able to save 1, take 3 wounds. However, vulnerable is spent and they then fail the 1 for 4 and then fail the panic test for an additional 1 for a total of 5 wounds. However, the panic token is spent and on the reroll they crit fail, taking a total of 7 wounds. They then trigger their order to use Lannister Supremacy. Hear Me Roar is played on top of that to make it a -3. However, they are still able to pass it. Gregor then activates and swings into the wolf. However, he misses all 4 attacks, doing no damage. The spearmen then activate and successfully charge into his flank. They also play Winter's Might to gain Sundering, putting him on a defense of 5. They throw 7 dice, and after a reroll from the weaken, only 3 get through. However, Gregor cannot save enough and is killed. The Starks score another victory point, putting them at 4. Both of the A Lannister Pays His Debt cards are now active. The spearmen then surge forth into the rear of the warrior's sons. Shaggy Dog pivots towards the rear of the honor guard, as does the Tully Cav. The honor guard then activates and moves 5 inches forwards, but then pivots around to face the Tully Cav. Tully Cav activate, they maneuver forward, and then declare a long charge on the warrior's sons. However, they roll a 6 and they get in. Crashing into their flank, they did pass through a corpse pile and lose their rerolls, but they still land 6 hits. However, the warrior's sons have an impressive defensive roll and do manage to block 4, taking 2. On their panic check, they then fail and take 2 more. The High Sparrow then activates and claims the crown. His influence goes on to the Stormcrow mercenaries, who he then targets. They fail and take 1 wound.
The warrior's sons then heal 1 wound back from the High Sparrow's influence.
However, they then activate and declare a retreat, gaining rerolls on the retreat. They use their higher roll and are able to pull back 12 inches. Upon retreating, the warrior's sons gain a weaken token, and the round ends. The Lannisters now only control 1 zone, giving them a total of 8 points, and the Starks, who managed to control 3 quadrants, score 3 and are right back in the game, 8-7 after 4 rounds. Lannisters will kick off round 5, and it seems likely that things might end this round. At the start of round 5, both players refill their hands up to 3 cards.
The North Remembers is played on Shaggy Dog.
The warrior's sons perform their war cry, however they fail it this time. The High Sparrow then activates and claims the swords. His influence goes onto the Tully Cav. The warrior's sons then change their facing and swing into the Tully Cav using a faith token to gain sundering and rerolls. After the rerolls, they manage to land 6 hits. However, a weaken token is spent, and after their additional reroll, 5 still get through. Tullys are able to block 2 and take 3 wounds. They then pass their panic test and heal back 2. However, the panic token is spent, and on the reroll, they still pass, healing back those 2. Rob then claims the maneuver zone, and his influence goes on Shaggy Dog. The Stormcrow mercenaries then maneuver back 5 inches away from the action. Pycelle then claims the crown and attempts to take out the Stormcrow mercenaries with a Hear Me Roar, giving an additional -3. On an 8, however, they fail it and take 2 wounds plus 1 from Hear Me Roar. It was enough to kill them. The Lannisters score a point, bringing them to 9. Arya then claims the wealth zone and removes the weaken token from the Karstark spearmen. Tywin activates and claims a quadrant. The Karstark spearmen activate and declare a charge on the warrior's sons. However, they do roll a 1 and lose their rerolls. They throw 7 dice, and after the 1 roll, only 2 dice hit. They save 1 and take 1 wound. However, by spending a faith token, they auto-block the 1 wound, which means they auto-pass their panic test and regain the faith token. The honor guard then activates and maneuvers back into the far quadrant, giving the Lannisters current possession of both sides of the Stark's original side of the battlefield. The Starks, however, are only in possession of one side at the moment. At this point, both players talk out the potential options left here for scoring. The Starks concede that they cannot win this game even if they were to kill the warrior's sons. And because Daven is the commander and worth an additional 3 points, the honor guard is worth more than the Tully Cav. So in the end, it is agreed that the Lannisters would score 2 and the Starks would score 1, bringing the final score 11-8.
A few things I learned from this game. The commander did seem good. We both agreed he was not overpowered. I would say that the list probably needs some more cheap units to make better use of the 2 catapult cards. I was able to get the first one off, but then after that I sat on the second card because it was more important to activate and use the unit. The poor fellows had to try to fight Shaggy Dog and Stormcrows and survive. So overall, I think the list maybe would have benefited from maybe a 5 activation on the battlefield list with a couple cheap units. And also, I think it was a big mistake not to include Walder Frey, not only just for the simple fun and thematic, but I mean, a lot of the 2 of his cards were designed around Walder Frey, and the interactions that these 2 characters have in the book indirectly through the alliance of the Freys and the Lannisters. So yeah, I think I will play this guy again, and I'll try a different list, and I'll definitely include Walder Frey to get full value out of the cards that I created. Kind of silly that I didn't do it in this game in hindsight, but Rickson's a tough opponent, and I was definitely going for something I thought could survive against his vicious Stark list. So it was a great game, and hopefully this battle report will be the start of more to come more frequently in the future. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. And thank you all for watching, and may the old gods and the new smile upon your dice rolls.